It was a cold Thursday morning when the boy's shoe came apart. The right sole had been fraying for weeks, the rubber edges flapping like the loose skin of an old balloon. That morning, as he hurried across the cracked pavement outside the school gate, it finally tore open. The hole spread like a wound, wide enough to show his sock, gray, thin, and wet from the rain. He bent down, pressed the sole together, and held it as if sheer will could mend it. He didn't notice the teacher standing by the window watching. Inside Ridgeway Middle School, mornings always began the same way. Buzzing corridors, lockers slamming shut, and the faint smell of chalk and cafeteria bread. In room 2B, Mrs. Keller stood by her desk, arranging the graded homework papers into neat stacks. She was known for her precision. Every pencil in her drawer pointed the same direction. Every student's essay had her red pen's verdict slashed across the top, firm, final, unbending. She believed in discipline, in appearances, in effort that could be seen. What she didn't see that morning was what effort looked like in the life of a boy like Evan Langley. He entered the classroom quietly, head low, his backpack held to his chest as if shielding himself from invisible blows. The other kids were louder, voices bouncing off the walls, sneakers squeaking. The storm outside had turned their laughter into echoes that filled the room. Evan took his usual seat in the back row, where the heater rattled and the wall was peeling. No one really talked to him. They used to years ago. But middle school had its own unspoken hierarchy, and poverty was a kind of disease. Mrs. Keller began her morning announcements, voice crisp and practiced. Before we start, I want to remind everyone about the assembly tomorrow. Dress appropriately. We'll be taking the school photo. Some of the girls giggled, already planning their outfits. Evan looked down at his shoes, the torn one, and the other whose laces didn't match. His stomach sank. He thought about pretending to be sick tomorrow. It wouldn't be the first time. Mrs. Keller's eyes swept the class like a searchlight. Now, before we begin with literature, I noticed something as you all came in, she said, her tone measured. Some of us seem to have forgotten what self-respect looks like. There was silence. Then, laughter from the front row, light, careless. Her gaze stopped on Evan. He froze. He could feel everyone else turning toward him, following her eyes. Evan, she said, her voice calm but cutting. Would you stand up for a moment? He hesitated. Ma'am. Stand up, please. His chair creaked as he rose. His right shoe bent awkwardly where it had torn. Mrs. Keller folded her arms. Class, she said. This is what happens when you stop taking pride in how you present yourself. A person's appearance reflects their character. Would anyone here go to a job interview looking like that? The laughter grew. Some kids tried to hide it behind their hands. Others whispered. Evan wanted to disappear. He tried to speak, but the words stuck. He looked at her crisp blouse, the silver chain around her neck, the calm face that seemed almost detached. He whispered, It broke this morning. Mrs. Keller tilted her head. Then perhaps next time plan ahead. You represent this school. Sit down. He sat. Slowly. The room's warmth turned unbearable. The chalk on the board blurred before his eyes. For the rest of the day he said nothing. When the bell rang, he left before anyone else, walking home through puddles that filled his ruined shoe. That night, his mother found him trying to fix it with glue and tape. The small apartment smelled of detergent and rain. She worked nights at the diner and hadn't seen the sun in days. When she saw the shoe, she sighed, knelt beside him, and ran her thumb over the tear. We'll get you a new pair next week. Okay? I promise, she said softly. Your teacher doesn't understand. Some people don't. He didn't answer. He just kept pressing the tape down, as if repairing something more than rubber and fabric. The next morning, the story had spread. Middle school stories always do. By lunchtime, everyone knew about Evan's broken shoe. Someone had even drawn a picture of it on the whiteboard. The janitor erased it before Mrs. Keller came in, but the damage was done. That day, he ate lunch alone behind the gym. For weeks after, he became quieter. His grades dropped. He started skipping classes. Mrs. Keller noticed but didn't intervene. She believed it was an attitude problem, a phase. "He'll learn responsibility," she told the counselor when asked. But she never saw how far the wound went. Years passed. Evan's mother died when he was 16. A heart condition. No insurance. He dropped out for a while to work odd jobs, construction, dishwashing, anything that paid cash. But he had something that didn't show. An ability to remember things exactly as they were said. Faces as they once looked, moments frozen in time. And he remembered that day. Every word. Every laugh. 2 decades later, on a quiet autumn morning, a woman named Laura Keller, the same teacher, though now with streaks of gray in her hair, walked into Ridgeway District Office, where she worked as an assistant principal. The school had changed since the old days. There were computers in every room, motivational posters on every wall. But some things never changed. The smell of floor polish, the buzz of the fluorescent lights, the weight of mornings. She was preparing for a meeting about a new education initiative. Something about scholarships for underprivileged students. A visiting guest speaker from the state was coming to lead the session, an alumnus of Ridgeway schools who'd gone on to head a foundation supporting disadvantaged youth. She didn't think much of it. Her focus was on her notes, the paperwork, the agenda, until the door opened. He walked in quietly, carrying only a slim leather folder. The moment she looked up, something in her froze, not from recognition, but from the strange familiarity of his eyes. Calm, dark, steady. The kind of eyes that see more than they reveal. He smiled politely and extended his hand. "Good morning. I'm Evan Langley. Thank you for hosting me." She stared, just for a second too long. Then she shook his hand. For a few seconds, the air in the room thickened. Something unspoken, electric. The others didn't notice, but she did. A memory surfaced. A boy in a worn sweater, torn shoes, a quiet humiliation. Her heart thudded once, hard. She smiled, pretending to remember him as any other alumnus. But as he began his presentation, his words echoed with something more than professionalism. There was poise, empathy, and a quiet weight that made the room still. And though he never mentioned her name, every sentence seemed to carry an echo of the past. When he finished, the staff applauded. Mrs. Keller, now Ms. Keller after her divorce, stood, clapping too. Her palms were trembling. He met her eyes for a moment. Then he said softly, "Some lessons we never forget." That night she couldn't sleep. She sat at her kitchen table, looking through old photo albums the school had kept from past years. She found the one from that year, the one with the school photo she'd made such a fuss about. Page after page of young faces, frozen in adolescence. And there he was, in the back row, his expression blank, his shoes barely visible. Her hand trembled on the page. She whispered to herself, "He remembers." Outside, rain began to fall, tapping gently against the glass. The same sound that had filled the classroom 20 years ago. And in that moment, she understood. Some wounds never fade. They grow quiet, invisible, and then return when you least expect. Walking right into your office, wearing the calm face of the person you once failed to see. That night, Miss Keller sat in the dark, long after the lights of her street had gone out. The rain had stopped, leaving the air heavy and damp. On the kitchen table, her old school yearbook lay open beneath a soft pool of light. Her glasses rested beside a cup of tea gone cold. She had traced his name on the page so many times the ink had begun to blur beneath her fingertips. Evan Langley, grade 8, unsmiling, distant, a boy she hadn't thought about in decades. She wanted to tell herself she'd done nothing wrong, that it was just another moment, another student, another long-ago classroom. But the memory wouldn't cooperate. It had been buried under 20 years of lesson plans, parent meetings, and quiet nights. Now it was awake, and it had his voice. At school the next morning, the staff room buzzed with chatter about the guest speaker. Everyone was still talking about how articulate, how inspiring he'd been. "Such poise," one teacher said. And that story he told about walking 3 miles to school as a kid, that was something. Miss Keller smiled faintly, pretending to join in. "Yes, quite something," she murmured. But as the others talked, she wondered, did they know it was the school? That the stories he told about being invisible, mocked, underestimated had begun right here in her classroom? By the time she returned to her office, her hands were shaking. On her desk sat a white envelope. Inside, a note written in neat cursive. Ms. Keller, thank you for allowing me to visit Ridgeway again. I hope to reconnect sometime to discuss our scholarship project. E. Langley. No number. No email. Just a foundation logo and a signature. She stared at the paper. The handwriting was calm, careful, elegant. Nothing like the boy who used to scribble in half-torn notebooks. She should have felt proud. One of her former students had made it. Instead, she felt exposed. That evening, she went down to the school archives. It was an old habit, her way of finding control. The basement smelled of cardboard and mildew, the air humming faintly from the pipes. Metal cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labeled by year. She opened the one marked 2003 to 2004 and began to leaf through student files. When she found his folder, she hesitated. Inside were the usual forms: attendance sheets, grade reports, counselor notes. She skimmed through, heart tightening at the small details. Family instability, frequent absences, economic hardship likely, mother ill, single parent. Then, a note she herself had written in red pen all those years ago. Evan has become withdrawn and unmotivated. Possible attitude problem. Recommending behavioral monitoring. L. Keller. Her handwriting looked alien, too sharp, too sure of itself. She could hear her own voice echoing through time, confident and cold. She slid the paper back into the folder, shut the drawer, and leaned against it for a long moment. The hum of the pipes filled the silence like a low confession. In the days that followed, she began noticing details she'd long ignored. The boy in the cafeteria eating alone. The girl who kept borrowing the same sweater from the lost and found. The small things, the way embarrassment could bruise a child's confidence like a hidden scar. She found herself slowing down, listening more. But it all felt like penance for something she could never undo. At home, she started searching online. Langley Foundation for Youth Resilience. This website was simple, no glamour, just stories. Scholarships for low-income students. School renovation projects. Workshops for teachers on empathy and trauma-informed classrooms. At the bottom of the page, she found a quote. Sometimes the lesson that changes you most isn't the one you were meant to learn. E.L. Her eyes filled before she realized they were. Weeks passed. She thought the memory would fade again. Didn't. Instead, it deepened. Until one afternoon, she received an email from the district office. Ms. Keller, Mr. Langley has requested a follow-up meeting regarding the scholarship pilot for Ridgeway. He'd like to meet with you personally. She sat back in her chair. The email seemed to pulse on her screen. Personal meeting. She stared out her office window. Beyond the glass, the playground was empty, the swings moving gently in the wind. She could almost see him there. 12 years old, head down, his shoe coming apart as the rain began to fall. They met the following Thursday. It was late afternoon, the kind of gray light that softened everything. The conference room was small, with 2 chairs and a faint scent of old coffee. When he walked in, she stood. Mr. Langley, she said, voice steady but thin. It's good to see you again. He smiled politely. Please call me Evan. And thank you for taking the time. He set his folder down and took a seat. For a few minutes, they discussed the scholarship, its logistics, funding sources, application criteria. But his tone was different this time. Gentler, as if every word had a shadow behind it. When they finished the formalities, she hesitated. She stopped, then began again. Evan, can I ask, do you remember much about your time here? He looked at her, eyes unreadable. I remember enough. She nodded slowly. You've done remarkable things since then. You must be proud. He smiled faintly. Pride's an odd thing. It's not really what drives me. What does? She asked. He paused, considering. Then said softly, the things people never apologized for. The air seemed to stop moving. She swallowed. I see. He leaned back, his gaze calm but heavy. Ms. Keller, I don't hold grudges. Not anymore. But I've spent years thinking about what makes children give up on themselves. And I realized sometimes it's not the big failures that break them. It's the small humiliations adults forget the moment they happen. Her voice cracked. You remember that day? I remember every word. There was no accusation in his tone, just a quiet certainty that felt worse than anger. I was young, she whispered. I thought I was teaching discipline. He nodded. I know. That's what makes it harder. They sat in silence for a long time. The sound of a clock filled the room. Then he said, I used to hate this place. I swore I'd never come back. But then I realized, the best revenge isn't distance. It's rebuilding what hurt you. She looked at him, at the man the boy had become. His voice was steady, his expression kind, almost weary. She wanted to say she was sorry, but the word felt too small for what it meant. Instead, she whispered, You did rebuild it. You did more than any of us ever did. He stood. Maybe, but I couldn't have without remembering who I didn't want to become. After he left, she remained seated, staring at the empty chair across from her. That night, she drove home past the same route Evan once walked every morning. Past the diner where his mother used to work, now an empty lot. Past the bus stop where children still gathered, shoes damp with rain. The world had changed, but some ghosts stayed rooted. Over the following days, she began writing. Not an email, not a message, a letter. She wrote by hand, slowly, carefully. Dear Evan, I have carried many lessons through the years, but none heavier than the one you gave me. I remember that morning. I remember my words. I remember the look on your face. I thought I was teaching strength, but I was teaching shame. I've watched students grow, succeed, and falter. I've celebrated graduations and mourned failures. But what I never faced was the damage I caused when I confused dignity with appearance. I don't ask forgiveness. I only want to thank you for reminding me that education is not about control, but about compassion. Laura Keller. She didn't send it right away. She kept it in her drawer for days, then weeks. Meanwhile, the scholarship program began to take shape. Evan's foundation sent over documentation, grant proposals, student criteria. Each file she opened carried his name, quietly reclaiming the place that once made him small. One document caught her eye. Langley Award for Student Resilience, dedicated to students who overcome adversity with grace, humility, and perseverance. She read the first paragraph twice, her vision blurring. It was signed, established in honor of a teacher who taught me what not to forget. No name mentioned, but she knew. A few days later, she mailed the letter. No return address, just her initials on the back flap. She didn't know if he'd read it, or if he'd already made peace in his own way. But the act of sending it felt like a kind of surrender, a quiet admission that some lessons come too late but still matter. Weeks turned into months. Spring arrived, bringing with it the first scholarship ceremony. The gymnasium was decorated with banners and lights. Students, parents, and teachers filled the rows of folding chairs. Ms. Keller stood near the stage, nerves tight, waiting. Evan was the keynote speaker again. As he stepped to the podium, applause filled the room. He spoke about resilience, about failure, about dignity. And halfway through his speech, his voice softened. I once had a teacher who believed success began with how you looked, he said. It took me years to understand what she was really teaching me. That self-worth should never depend on who's watching. He paused, looking out across the crowd. For a moment, his gaze met hers. And if she's listening, he continued quietly, I want her to know. I learned. I truly did. And I hope she has too. The room was silent. Then applause. Then standing applause. Afterward, he didn't approach her. He didn't have to. As he left the stage, she saw him glance her way. A small nod, almost imperceptible. She returned it. Nothing more. It was enough. That night, she walked home beneath the streetlights, the evening breeze soft against her face. For the first time in years, the weight she carried felt lighter. Not gone, but lighter. She passed a shoe store still open late, its display lit with rows of new sneakers and polished leather shoes. She stopped for a moment, staring at them, symbols of something so small, yet once so cruelly powerful. And she whispered, half to herself, half to the night, "Some lessons never leave us." Years passed. The scholarship grew. What began as a modest program for Ridgeway students expanded into dozens of schools across the state. Newspapers wrote quiet pieces about it. Former dropout funds hope for others. They printed his photo in grayscale, the headline small, the story smaller. But for those who knew what it meant, it was everything. And for Laura Keller, it became the echo that shaped the rest of her life. By the time she turned 60, she had retired from Ridgeway. The district gave her a plaque, a luncheon, and a line in the newsletter. After 35 years of dedicated service, Ms. Keller leaves a lasting mark on our students and staff. No one mentioned the letter she'd written. No one knew of the moment that changed her more than any workshop or degree ever could. But she carried it quietly. The invisible weight that had once been shame, now softened into something like clarity. She moved into a small apartment overlooking the park. She spent her mornings reading, her afternoons volunteering at the library, her evenings walking alone. She'd sometimes pass the old school on her way home, its walls freshly painted, the yard filled with laughter. And every time she'd think of him, Evan Langley, he'd become something of a quiet legend, appearing at conferences, policy meetings, news interviews, always modest, always speaking of dignity, of unseen struggle, of how empathy could change the world faster than punishment ever did. She watched one of his televised talks one evening, years after the ceremony. His hair had streaks of gray now, his voice deeper, steadier. He told a story, again without naming her. "When I was 13, someone taught me that the world values appearance more than effort. For a long time I believed her. Then life showed me otherwise. That teacher was part of my story, but so was what came after, the choice to become someone different." He smiled gently then, a man at peace with the past. Forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let an old version of yourself dictate who you become. She turned off the TV and sat for a long time in the dark. Forgiveness. She'd spent her life trying to earn something he'd given her long ago. Silently, in that small nod at the scholarship ceremony. But the truth she understood now was simpler. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It only changes what you do with it. One morning, a letter arrived. It came in a plain envelope, no return address. Just her name, handwritten with the same careful slant she remembered. She opened it slowly. "Dear Ms. Keller, I received your letter years ago. I read it more than once. I never responded because I didn't know how to say what I felt. Not without reopening things we'd both already healed from. I want you to know that I never hated you. I hated the silence that followed. But I've learned that silence can teach, too. It forces us to listen differently. The truth is, your words that day shaped me. Not the humiliation, but the understanding that followed. I realized that pain can either make us cruel or make us kind. You helped me choose the latter, even if you never meant to. Thank you for writing. And for remembering. Evan." She pressed the paper to her chest and wept. Not from sadness, but from release. The sound of rain began to fall outside again, steady and soft against the window. For a moment, the years folded in on themselves. A torn shoe, a boy's lowered head, the sharp edge of her own voice echoing through the classroom. And now silence, finally gentle. Months later, she received another envelope, this time from the Ridgeway Foundation. Inside was an invitation to the annual scholarship gala. She hadn't attended since retirement. But this time, something in her wanted to go, not to be seen, but simply to witness. She arrived quietly, blending into the crowd. The hall was bright with music and laughter. Students moved between tables in formal clothes, clutching certificates and shaking hands. She recognized the pride in their faces, the kind she once believed could be taught by discipline. Now she knew better. It was nurtured by being seen. Then, the announcer's voice filled the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, Please welcome Mr. Evan Langley. The applause rose. Cameras flashed. He stepped up to the podium, the same calm dignity as always. He began by thanking the sponsors, the educators, the families. Then his voice grew quieter. This program began because one person failed me, he said. And because that failure taught me the cost of indifference. But it also taught me something else, that people can change. That remorse can become service. That one harsh lesson can still lead to gentler ones. He paused, scanning the audience. There's someone here tonight who once taught me in ways neither of us understood. She may not know it, but her courage to confront the past helped shape this entire foundation. I owe her more than an apology could ever repay. I owe her gratitude. He looked toward the back of the room. For a moment their eyes met, and in that glance, no words, no gestures, passed a truth that needed no audience. After the ceremony, she tried to slip out quietly, but near the exit he appeared beside her. "Leaving already?" he asked, his voice warm. She smiled faintly. "Old habits. I was never good at being the center of attention." He chuckled softly. "Neither was I." They stood for a moment watching the students pose for photographs. The air smelled faintly of cologne, confetti, and the sweetness of new beginnings. "You've built something remarkable," she said. He looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "We built it, Miss Keller. You're part of this story, whether you like it or not." She laughed quietly. "I don't deserve that." "Maybe not," he said. "But sometimes the people who taught us pain are the same ones who taught us empathy. It just takes years to see it." She nodded, eyes glistening. "I'm sorry, Evan. Truly." He smiled gently. "You already said it without saying it. That's enough." When she returned home that night, she placed the invitation and his letter on her mantel beside the retirement plaque. The three objects, an award, a letter, and an envelope, told her life story more truthfully than any resume could. She thought of how, all those years ago, she'd believed teaching was about control, about shaping others into order. Now she saw that real teaching began with humility, the courage to be wrong, the grace to change. The following spring, she received another letter from the foundation. It announced a new initiative, the Keller Langley Fellowship, a mentorship program pairing teachers with at-risk students, designed to build empathy and understanding on both sides of the classroom. She read the name twice, disbelief turning to quiet awe. He'd chosen to share it. Her name, once a source of shame, now part of something healing. Tears filled her eyes as she whispered, "He forgave me more than I forgave myself." Years drifted on. Her hair turned white, her hands slower. The world around her changed again, new schools, new policies, new faces. But some mornings, she still woke before dawn, hearing echoes of chalk scraping against a board, the murmur of children settling into seats, and the faint sound of rain against a window pane. Those mornings, she would brew her tea, sit by the window and think of him. The boy who had once sat in the back row, invisible and humiliated, who became the man who taught her what true education meant. One winter, she fell ill. Nothing dramatic, just the slow, inevitable fading of the body. As she rested in the quiet room of a small care home, a nurse entered carrying a small box delivered that morning. It bore no sender's name, only a return address from the Langley Foundation. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a pair of children's shoes, polished, new, and neatly tied. And beneath them, a card. For every student who thought they weren't enough. And for the teacher who finally saw them. Her breath caught. The shoes were the same size and color as those she remembered, the torn ones from all those years ago. She traced the stitching with trembling fingers, her heart full. She passed away quietly a few months later. When the foundation held its next ceremony, a chair at the front row was left empty, a small bouquet resting on it. Evan spoke again that evening, his tone softer than ever. "She taught me one of life's hardest truths, that we are all both wound and healer, and sometimes, the people who break us are the ones who teach us how to mend others." He paused, his voice thickening. "We remember her not for a mistake, but for what she did after, for daring to face it." Silence filled the hall, thick, reverent, human. Later, after the guests had left, He stood alone on the stage, the lights dim. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small folded paper, the letter she had written him years ago. It had yellowed slightly at the edges, creased from being opened too many times. He read it again quietly, like a prayer. Then he placed it in a small envelope, sealed it, and tucked it into the Foundation's archives, filed under Origins. Outside, rain began to fall. He stepped out beneath it, feeling the cool drops soak his hair and coat. Across the street, a group of students ran past, laughing, their shoes splashing through puddles. He smiled. There was something poetic about it, how the story had begun in rain and ended in it, too. Only now the rain no longer carried shame, carried cleansing. In the end, the truth was simple. A single act of cruelty had shaped 2 lives, but so had the courage to face it. And somewhere in that balance, between guilt and grace, between wound and forgiveness, their humanity had met halfway.